I have been waiting to make this video for a long time, so I'll just cut right to the chase. Metal Gear Solid 3 is one of the most wholly entertaining experiences you will ever have playing a video game. This game is that good. There's something about the PS2/Xbox era of gaming that I miss with my whole heart. The games back then were generally designed with one core ideology in mind: replayability. As much as I love how grandiose modern games can be with runtimes that often exceed triple digits, there's something about the more streamlined experiences that you get from these games that calls to me. Games like Metal Gear Solid 3 were designed with so much attention to detail and care put into the level design, enemy interactions, and story beats that you can legitimately play through this game twice in a row and have a completely different experience on your second playthrough. Story aside, of course. In fact, it was encouraged to play through these games multiple times to find all the secrets, and back then, especially for a series like Metal Gear Solid, it was absolutely worth it to do so, if not to see who could get the best rank in your friend group upon beating the story, or just to collect all the really fun secret items you missed your first time around. And for today's video, I wanted to dive back into this glorious masterpiece once again, and to share with you all exactly why I love Metal Gear Solid 3 so much, and to hopefully convince you to pick up the game and give it a chance once the remake comes out. Do you know how long I've waited for this moment? Or to at least help give you a greater sense of appreciation for a work of art like this one with a voice that just begs to be heard. So, without further ado, let's throw on our best wingsuits and say, "May God be with you," to a salute as we dive into the jungle together. That is Metal Gear Solid 3, Snake Eater.
Eat up! No! Don't tell me he got out of here! Knock it off!
One thing you'll come to learn very quickly if you become a fan of this series is that Kojima is a compulsive liar.
It's a jungle out there.
The Metal Gear Solid series, and most specifically MGS3, make use of hyperreality when telling their stories. Hyperreality is essentially being unable to distinguish truth from a simulation of the same truth. Kojima rattles off true events that happened during the Cold War period of the United States in the opening cutscenes of the game, but twists it just enough so that if you were telling someone about the 1960s and they never lived through it themselves, they wouldn't have any idea that you were bending certain aspects of the truth. Obviously, that illusion is shattered a little bit, being that we're playing a video game which is obviously fictitious in nature, but you get my point. In MGS3, Kojima basically rewrites history to include his characters, and that's how he makes use of hyperreality. Everybody knows that Snake didn't save the world from nuclear holocausts 60 years ago. Or did he?
Really now? How many times must I tell you?
It is a little something for everyone.
Twisting historical events isn't the only thing Kojima lies about either. Every Metal Gear Solid gives the player a mission briefing sequence at the beginning of the game that outlines, in very, very extensive detail, what the mission objective is. And they be sure to tell you, not just once mind you, that this is a sneaking mission.
You can't let anyone see you. You can't let the enemy know you're there. This is a stealth mission. You're a ghost, Snake, in every sense of the word. Contact with the enemy is strictly prohibited. Don't engage them in battle either. This is a stealth mission. Got that?
The point of this mission is to sneak through the jungle without being seen.
Kojima will design these intricate levels complete with buildings and crawl spaces for you to hide in, and drop enemies down into it with patrol routes that you can figure out if you have a keen eye. And then, in the same breath, hand you a rocket launcher with a heat-seeking missile and expect you not to shoot it at every enemy you see. Because again, Kojima is a compulsive liar. You can absolutely go through the entirety of MGS3 without killing a single enemy soldier, and you actually get rewarded for it in a later boss fight if you do that, but the only problem with that is that Kojima expects me to be good at this game.
Who's that?
It's much easier and more fun to just go in guns blazing and run around like a jackass, leaving a trail of bodies in your wake. But this is also where the replayability of these games come in. Because these games aren't overly long and you can thankfully skip the cutscenes with a click of a button, well, not those cutscenes, it becomes very easy to just do another playthrough of the game but with a different goal in mind. And because every playthrough will have the same enemies in the same locations on the maps, you can judge for yourself how much your sneaking abilities have leveled up as you play more. But if you're a person like me, your sneaking abilities most likely end up looking something like this, no matter how many times you replay these same levels.
I'm out of here! Help!
But I want to take a break from the gameplay for a minute and talk about this game's story. Metal Gear Solid 3 has one of the coolest opening sequences in all of video games, and if this isn't enough to hook you for the full ride, I don't know what will be. Kojima wears his influences and storytelling on his sleeve, and that is especially true with this game, but its story still serves to be a love letter to Kojima's favorite works of art rather than a blatant imitation of them. This game has elements of James Bond with the intro and the Snake Eater theme song, which if you haven't heard, stop watching this video right now and go play it full blast into your eardrums. Rambo, The Great Escape, Predator, Godzilla, Creature from the Black Lagoon, The Fly, all these movies curated Kojima's taste in storytelling, and these influences make themselves known one way or another in this game.
Snake, do you know The Creature from the Black Lagoon?
Nope, never heard of it.
And I think it makes the series all the better because of it. There's really nothing else out there in the gaming industry like Metal Gear Solid, and Kojima has a knack of creating games that only he could have created, for better or sometimes for worse. But the awesome thing about Metal Gear Solid 3 is that there is no for worse in this game. The primary issue with me recommending this series to anyone who doesn't know anything about it is that the story can legitimately make zero sense from an outsider's perspective. Metal Gear Solid 1 and 2 are great games in a vacuum, but if you have no experience with the series, you're going to have to just accept that you're going to be confused as hell through most of your first playthrough. Additionally, Metal Gear Solid 4 is not going to be worth your time, and I mean lots of time, to sit through those long cutscenes if you have no idea what they're even rambling on about. These games require some outside effort from the consumers to fully understand why these characters are significant for the overall series if you play them in a vacuum. But by comparison, Metal Gear Solid 3 is a pretty straightforward, self-contained narrative that features important characters to the overarching lore, but still serves as a great entry point into the series as the first game chronologically. Like Metal Gear Solid 5, you play as the man who would eventually become the antagonist for the entire series, Big Boss. Only in Snake Eater, he's yet to assume that title and goes by his old codename of Naked Snake. And it becomes very apparent that Snake Eater's purpose is that of an origin story for many of these characters. You have a young Revolver Ocelot and Eva with Snake, as well as Major Zero serving as head honcho for this mission. Snake Eater's lack of any recognizable characters from Metal Gear Solid 2 was most likely a response to the backlash caused by the Raiden fiasco in that game, even though in hindsight, it really was brilliant storytelling and is something that the game is lauded for 2 decades later.
Raiden, turn the game console off right now.
What did you say?
The mission is a failure. Cut the power right now.
What's wrong with you?
Don't worry, it's a game.
But what makes Metal Gear Solid 3 such a great, concise story is that each one of the 5 main characters moves the plot forward in some way and contributes to the game meaningfully. Snake, Eva, Ocelot, Volgin, the boss, and the Cobra unit make Snake Eater so memorable, and each of these characters is revealed to have their own personal motivations driving their actions that are completely predictable to see once you know their true intentions. Snake Eater at its essence is a story about betrayal, and it feels like every character in this game is working as a triple agent under the guise of multiple personas to the point where it'll make your head spin. This dynamic, however, makes for interesting interactions that lead to scenes like the one from The Office where everybody's pointing finger guns at each other, but nobody really knows who they should be pointing at. This game's themes of betrayal and espionage are made abundantly clear in what I consider to be the game's prologue, the Virtuous Mission. Snake Eater is a game that's split into 2 parts. The Virtuous Mission, which serves as a precursor to the events that will unfold in Operation Snake Eater, which is basically the rest of the game. In the Virtuous Mission, Snake is tasked with rescuing a Soviet weapons master named Sokolov, who was commissioned by the Russian government to build a Shagohod, a tank with the capabilities of firing nuclear arms across the world from anywhere in the Soviet Union. It's up to the player to sneak through the jungle and to extract Sokolov alive to prevent the world from falling into a nuclear war. Not much at stake here, really. No pressure, I swear. better. But upon reaching Sokolov, the player is intercepted by the boss, Snake's mentor that you previously lost contact with on the codec calls, and it's revealed that she is defecting to the Soviet Union, effectively betraying her former student as well as her entire nation. Colonel Volgin, the big bad of the game, then launches a missile at a nearby Soviet stronghold to place the blame on the United States and potentially ignite a nuclear war. The boss then defeats Snake in CQC and tosses him off a bridge, leaving him to die severely wounded in the jungle. And with that, the Virtuous mission ends in utter failure, with much more at stake than the Fox unit was ever prepared for. Admittedly, and I know I said before that this game really has no for worse moments that plagued other entries in this series, but if I had to criticize one aspect of this game, it's that the Virtuous mission is a little slow to get going in comparison to the rest of the game before us. My biggest gripe with Metal Gear in general is how at times, the ratio of cutscenes to actual gameplay can be a teeter-totter between this shit is basically a movie to a more balanced approach where it feels like all the cutscenes are in an appropriate place and nothing ever drags on for too long before moving on to the next phase. Thankfully, Operation Snake Eater absolutely falls into the latter half of these two sides, seeing a nice mixture of cutscenes and gameplay that keeps me equal parts engaged and motivated to continue my playthrough. Once Snake Eater loosens its reins on the player, the gameplay opens up and you feel adequately prepared for the task at hand of navigating the jungle, hunting for food to restore your stamina meter, and tending to your wounds when a combat engagement goes south. Mixing these different gameplay ingredients into a nice snake salad sets the foundation for what a player can expect when playing through this magnificent game of old. And honestly, sets up for a really fantastic remake with more modern graphics and increased map density, so Konami, please don't fuck this up.
Oh, my stomach. Oh, I can't hold it anymore.
Operation Snake Eater also introduces the Cobra unit to serve as nice transitional boss fights between areas Snake must traverse to reach the Soviet stronghold where the Shagohod is being held. Each fight with the Cobra unit is unique and requires a different strategy based on the abilities they possess. It's also worth noting that in the majority of these fights, the bosses can be defeated in a number of ways, some of which I view as cool Easter eggs more than anything else. The fight with the Pain sees players diving underwater to avoid the swarm of hornets encompassing his body while chucking grenades up at him to break up that swarm. The fight with the Fear sees players having to keep track of this alternate timeline Spider-Man while he turns invisible and dashes through the trees above while shooting poison darts down at you. The fight with the End is an intense cat and mouse reminiscent of the Quiet fight in Metal Gear Solid 5. The End will constantly maneuver throughout the jungle and snipe you down from across the map while you have to use your goggles to track his footprints and sneak up behind him. Also, here's a fun fact from the original game that I'm sure everyone knows by now. In the original release of Metal Gear Solid 3, you could just leave your console turned on or skip time on your internal clock 2 weeks, and he would just die of old age and you'd never have to fight him at all. I'm not kidding. This is amazing. The Fury might have been the most frustrating fight of my replay of this game, as the mechanics of the original Snake Eater re-releases can be tricky at times to combat when you're forced into quick reflex-oriented situations. Again though, something else that I hope the remake can finally get right after all these years. And lastly, the Sorrow, which isn't a difficult fight whatsoever, but instead is more of a cool gimmick where you will have to maneuver through this river avoiding the ghosts of all the soldiers and bosses you killed along your journey. If a ghost touches you, you lose some health, but if you make it all the way to the end of the river, you're rewarded with this cool camouflage that alone would be fun to replay the game with, if nothing else. The Cobra unit boss fights in this game were truly unlike anything else I'd seen in video games for their time, and are fights that I am excited to re-experience in a next-gen version of this game. I really hope they're able to rework these fights into something even more modern that doesn't feel like a clone of everything else that gets released nowadays. In between these high-action fights, however, Metal Gear Solid 3 seasons its runtime with interesting cutscenes and character notes to keep players pushing onward to see how this will all play out. I mentioned this before, but this game is brilliantly paced and written with each of the main characters getting screen time and moving the plot forward in one way or another. It's not an overly complicated story or necessary to explain away something that didn't make sense with a future retcon either. See? It is entirely possible, Kojima. If it feels like I'm leaving a lot of details out about this game, it's because I mostly am. Metal Gear Solid 3 is a game that is difficult for me to put into words. It's just a tight-knit experience all around with a story that is worthy of a playthrough by anyone who considers themselves a fan of video games. It also serves as a great entry into the rabbit hole that is Metal Gear Solid and leaves off on enough of a cliffhanger to make you want to continue playing through the series. This game set the bar for all future Metal Gear games to aspire to reach in terms of creating a concise, enjoyable story that rivals classic espionage thrillers of old with gameplay that is worth revisiting even 19 years later. Couple that with an incredible soundtrack and main theme song with stellar voice performances that, fun fact, will be reused in the remake. They were so good. If you take the time to play this game for the first time, I highly encourage you to seek out every detail you can. You'll be amazed at what was accomplished in a game that was originally designed for the PS2. The lack of a radar, don't forget we're in the 60s, will strike you if you've played Metal Gear Solid and Metal Gear Solid 2 before, but after a couple of minutes of adapting to the jungle, Metal Gear Solid 3 will only give you a great time. Sure, it's annoying to have to go through the menu to change outfits, check the map, or feed yourself, but that's also the beauty of a 2004 game. What's more, Metal Gear Solid 3 is a crucial episode for understanding the origins of the series. The team did a great job mixing real and fictional stories, and the result is stunning from the beginning to the end. Long story short, when the remake or remastered versions come out later this year, you will no longer have an excuse to not experience this timeless masterpiece. I guess all I have to leave you with is...
What a thrill.
And what a thrill indeed.
With darkness and silence through the night.
Here it comes. Still going. Wow. I didn't think that was possible. That's a record. Ugh. Will this even flush?